Life is a long highway and I'm just doing the best I can.
Welcome back to the Straight Line to Success. I am so excited to be with my next guest, our guest today, Mr. Sam Sokolow. Sam, I don't even know where to start. I mean, there's so many things that you have done that I've learned over the last couple of years. We've been friends. Appreciate you being here. Entertainment, you know, you are someone that's steeped in the entertainment world, grew up in New York, successful in New York, successful in LA. Now you're in South Carolina. We're very lucky to have you. You've got a lot of great things that you have brought.
I'm the lucky one.
A lot of great energy. And so, look, we're not going to be able to get it all in today. So we'll have to, I hope that I can up front get you to commit to coming back.
I'm yours, David.
All right.
You need me, I'm here.
That's a beautiful thing. That's a beautiful thing. But hey, welcome in, Sam. You know, give us a little bit of, if you don't mind, your background. Just give me your story. How did you end up here?
Well, the big headline is love. I fell in love with a girl from Gaffney, South Carolina.
Beautiful. What's her name?
Her name is Julia Fowler.
Okay.
When we met, she was pursuing Broadway. Extremely talented person, and owned a dance school in Gaffney with her parents, and really brought a lot to this community, the upstate, in terms of culture and dance. And when we had our very first date, it was going so well that we started talking about, what if we got married one day?
Wow,
like a weird
first date,
man. And and I aimed really low. I was like, I like to watch the New York Giants. So, I'm going to watch this football game, 16 to 20 times a year, depending on the year. She had much bigger plans. She was like, I want a big Southern wedding. I want to make sure we have the. But the number one thing that she did say is that she's an only child. She's very dedicated to her family, which we both are. And I think that's what really connected us. And she said, basically, I'm going to end up back in South Carolina one day with my mom and dad. My entertainment dreams are taking me on this journey.
Yeah.
But the journey's ending up back in South Carolina. So if you want to, pretty much have a second date.
You want to dance with me.
Take that into account, right? and I had a second date. And so here I am now, living in Greenville.
Yeah.
And working on numerous things, but the main focus is building the Clemson film program, helping to build the Clemson film program, specifically the production side, getting cameras in students' hands, teaching them how to make films, teaching them the process to succeed in the filmmaking world. But I ended up here, really because of family. And I think when you do things for love, all the right miracles follow. It's a phrase that I learned along the way from one of my mentors, which is, you want to sail in life. You don't want to row. Catch the wind. Don't go against the tide. And, the beautiful winds of the universe brought me here.
Yeah.
And I'm honored to be here. So that's the real reason. Fundamentally, all I ever wanted to do was make movies. That was it. I was one of those young people that knew exactly what I wanted to do from the time I was a little kid.
And how did that, when you say, hey, I wanted to do that all my life. You grew up in New York, got a brother and
a sister.
Yep. And parents that were in the entertainment business.
Yep.
And so how old were you when you got exposed early, but how old were you when you said, hey, I want to make films?
Well, it was interesting.
Tell us about that.
It was a combination of things, I think, that happened to me, where my dad was a remarkable man and a real leader of our family, like a real gentleman, a true person that I still look up to this day, even though he hasn't been on this earthly plane for a long time.
What's his name?
Mel.
Okay.
Mel Sokolow.
Mel Sokolow.
Great guy. He was, as we say, literally, this wasn't a joke. He was the kind of person that you pull up to a light in New York City, a cab would pull up next, and he would know the driver and the passenger. And he'd done business with the passenger, grew up with the driver. You're just like a really cool guy.
Awesome.
My mom, when I was about 5 years old, they decided that they needed a second income, and my mom needed a job. And she fell into a job as a story editor, which was a script reader and somebody that helped find stories for a producer named Robert Stigwood, who went on to produce Saturday Night Fever. And my mom just had an incredible knack for finding stories and finding articles or books that would translate into movies or TV shows. So her career didn't start in the entertainment space until I was about 5 or 6.
Okay.
My brother and sister at the time were maybe 11 and 12. By the time,
And what's their names? Just
my brother's name is Alec,
Yep.
A-L-E-C, Alex Sokolow. My sister's Betsy.
And your mom?
And my mom is Diane.
Okay.
And she just turned 90.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. We just had an
Awesome.
amazing celebration of her together in New York. It was really special with all the grandkids and everybody. But when my mom started doing that work, and my mom and dad together were in the media. We weren't out in Hollywood doing all that, but they were in the media in New York City.
Yeah.
And we got exposed to that world. At the same time that was happening, my brother and sister are 6 and 7 years older than me. They had lives. They were teenagers. And my mom and dad both worked. So I was a pretty big kid. So babysitters weren't really needed, and so I was what was called a latchkey kid.
Okay.
So I would go home after school every day and pretty much be on my own until everybody got home. So for 4 or 5 hours every day, I was by myself in an apartment in New York, and I had movies. New York was a place where, when I was a kid, there were channels that showed movies all the time, either classic films, monster movies, indie films, or westerns. And movies became my imaginary friend, my babysitter, and seeing my mom and dad sort of navigate that world while spending so much time with movies, it became the thing that I wanted to do. I wanted to be a part of creating. I wanted to be a part of storytelling.
Yeah.
And I really believe that stories are the bedrock of humanity. They're the bedrock of society, as we've talked about.
Yeah.
God even understood that we absorb stories.
Yeah.
And that to communicate with human beings, stories are needed. And I think we interact better with stories. I think that if doctors need to frame things for patients in a certain way, stories help them understand it.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurs can tell a story to investors, not just show numbers. And that story takes hold. So once I understood that you could actually make a living telling stories, I was done, man.
Yeah, well, it's fantastic. And again, this is a success and leadership podcast, and really trying to help people that are interested in what you're doing to try to find success in that. We talk about the straight line to success. No straight line to success, but if a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points, hopefully conversation with someone like a Sam Sokolow will help people shortcut that.
Yeah, I mean, look, on one hand, yes. On another hand, there's no shortcuts.
Well,
right?
that's
You got to
right.
do the work.
Yes, that's right.
There are no shortcuts in life. And I've learned that.
Yeah.
But in terms of that straight line to success, again, I'm a product of my own dreams and a lot of mentorship.
Yep.
And listening.
Okay.
Right? We're here on a podcast, so we're having a conversation.
Yeah.
My job to talk.
Right.
But listening, I think, is the greatest skill you can have. And one of the many mentors I've been so blessed to have, told me when I was young, if you know where you want to go, be very clear with yourself where you want to go. Because like a compass, if you set your compass 1 degree off, in 10 years, you'll be far away from your goal.
Wow.
So when you talk about the straight line to success, it's also about where you aim that line. You might get blown off path. But if you aimed your compass in a very specific place to begin with, you'll always get back on the path towards what you want.
Yep.
And if you let yourself get too far afield, or you say, well, that's what I want, but you know what? I'll get there by going here. You're going to end up at the wrong place.
So let me ask you this. First of all, two questions. First of all, how do you define success?
I define success at this moment in my life, honestly, by the success of the people that I work with.
Okay.
A lot of people ask you, what does a producer do? They kind of know what a director does.
That's what you consider yourself, a producer?
That's what I am.
Okay.
That's what I consider myself. I think that's what the world considers me.
All right.
But that's what I am.
Yeah.
And
I want to talk about the genius story, but
happily.
but success.
Happily. Yeah. And so, I think people kind of know what an actor does, whether they know how they do it. They know what they do. They know what writers do. They know what a costume designer does. Producers are are a rare breed, and I think one of those hard to define jobs. But I distill down what I do as putting talented people in a position to succeed. If I can put a group of talented people in a position to succeed and support them properly, and they all have success, that means my project's a success.
Yep.
Right? So I really define my success by the success of the team I'm working with.
That's fantastic. Now, let me just try to frame this up as quick as I can, because, again, you've done a lot. But when I met you a few years back, a couple years ago, you were and had much success with this series, if that's a right word for it, called Genius.
Yes.
Genius. And, started with Einstein.
Yes.
And then went to Aretha, and of course, I was honored to bring my daughter Gibson over to Clemson and be in a premiere of the MLK, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, where you juxtapose those as genius, which I thought was genius, and I love that story.
Thank you.
But how did that set up? I mean, take us back, and I know you were nominated for a couple of, I believe, Emmys on that.
Yep,
So
yep.
congratulations on that.
I learned the very definition of it's just an honor to be nominated.
Hey,
no,
well,
I'm just kidding. Yeah, no,
but you talk about success, where you want to go, and then that leads to being able to achieve those things that you set out for. So how did this come up? Frame that up for us.
So, well, Genius specifically was a book. It started with a book about Albert Einstein,
Okay.
Written by a biographer named Walter Isaacson, who I think is the premier biographer of our time. He wrote the Steve Jobs biography. He did a Da Vinci biography that was amazing. He did Ben Franklin, that was incredible. And I'll tie it back. I'll tell you the story a little bit. But in talking to Walter, I asked him, how do you choose a subject? Or is there one thread between all these different geniuses that you've written about in history? Ben Franklin, Da Vinci, Einstein. And he said that the one commonality they'll have is curiosity. They're curious. And I think I'm curious.
Okay.
If nothing else. I want to know how things are done. I want to learn how things are done. I'm curious about the world. I'm curious about people. And so as a producer, you develop a lot of different projects along the way. And I do think that the definitional project, if you're lucky, finds you as well. It's not just you. So when Genius happened, I actually had a comedy set up at HBO that starred the actor Kurt Russell and his son Wyatt. And I was 100% convinced that was going to be the one. That was going to be I had done, very fortunately, I'd had 15 or 16 shows on the air already that I executive produced. I've made a bunch of movies. I'm a process-oriented person, so I like the process of production. So I've been involved in a lot of production in my career. But Genius really became the definitional project. And I thought that HBO comedy was going to be it, but this was the one that won the day. And I'm thrilled that it did, because being associated with it, and being somebody that really knows I helped birth the series, it's been magical. But we wanted to tell that story because of two reasons. One, humanizing iconic people is very important. It's very important for everybody to understand that every single human being, wakes up in the morning and puts their pants on the same way and goes to work and tries to find some version of success or happiness. And oftentimes what they think is their version of success, isn't the full picture. So, one thing that we wanted to touch on is the price of being a genius.
The price, there's a cost associated with it.
Sometimes it's hard to be a good husband. Sometimes it's hard to be a good father or a good wife or a good mother because you're so focused on your work. And so, do you define success by your family dynamic? Do you define success by your monetary success? Do you define success by fame? And in Einstein's case, I think it was really about solving the secrets of the universe. Really figuring out what is reality? What are we? And these are very heady things. But Einstein also came along at a time, not to digress a little bit on it, but he came along at a moment around, 1905 was what they call his miracle year, when mass media was exploding for the first time. So at the beginning of the 20th century, you actually had the society evolving from you're kind of known for achieving something to now we need to create celebrity, right? Media's exploding, newspapers, radio. We need celebrity.
Yeah.
And celebrities didn't really exist before that in the same way. I mean, there were kings and people that had authority,
Yeah.
but there weren't celebrities until the early 1900s.
Yeah.
So in that first decade of the century, or first 15 years, you have the first movie star, Charlie Chaplin.
Okay.
You have the first sports star, Babe Ruth. And you have the first genius, Albert Einstein, on a global level.
Nice.
So what does that mean for a guy like that? And we wanted to humanize him and really tell the story of the man and of the person and of the price of genius, while also acknowledging his contribution to society, because, as Einstein himself said, God doesn't play dice with the universe. And so the idea that science is somehow different than spirituality, I disagree with personally. I think that you can be a fully spiritual human being and somebody that fully believes in science.
Yeah.
They're not opposed to each other.
I agree.
Everything is God-given. So Einstein knew that also and wanted to forward science. And I believe that science deserved a moment in the spotlight as well.
Yeah.
And I'm not here to be like pedantic about that and tell you what to believe. But by elevating a guy like Einstein to a global moment, like our TV show,
Yeah.
I think it just allowed people to think a little bit on the validity of science, while also really learning a lot about the man.
Yeah.
And then we got lucky or made our luck with a lot of hard work. But we did get Ron Howard to come on to direct the pilot. And Ron's one of the great artists of our time.
Incredible.
An Academy Award winning actor named Jeffrey Rush came on to play Einstein.
Yeah.
With Ron's direction, and that really elevated the whole series, which also taught me more about how to try to not only tell stories, but tell stories that like everyone can see. So you have to also get things out there in the world. We can. I mean, this podcast will go out to the world. Right. So stories get out there. And how can you elevate those stories? And I think that's where doing things in a mass media business model, is good.
Yeah.
If you want to tell certain stories.
And I want to get to talking about that. I mean, that gets you to really what you're doing here up to date. But before we get to the present.
But let me just go back
ahead.
and say,
absolutely.
Ultimately, Einstein didn't happen because I dreamt of it.
Okay.
Einstein happened because we put energy and effort, not pun intended, we put energy and effort into it, and we developed a script.
I think I'm coming up with a formula.
Right. Put enough energy into it, matter happens. But we found an amazing young writer who was the right writer. I'm a real believer in bringing on the right person, not necessarily the name person.
Gotcha.
The right person. And this young writer named Noah Pink was the right person to write this. And we believed in Noah. And he wrote such a spectacular script.
Yes.
Pilot episode to this series. And the thing about at least filmed entertainment is ideas are not worth a lot. How you're telling the story is what it's all about. So our script that we developed with Noah was how we want to tell Einstein's story, not that we want to tell Einstein's story. And when Ron Howard read that script, that's what he said, I believe in how you're telling the story. I see how you've cracked the code on this guy's life. This is really interesting. And because we developed it for television, we had 10 hours to tell his life. And that was part of our vision, because his life, some lives are too big for 2 hours.
Yeah.
Right? It is in fact a physics lesson.
Yeah.
We couldn't fit his life into 2 hours because ultimately, and again, I know I'm going on a tangent, but for anybody that's interested in telling stories, one of the greatest things that you have to distill down are what are the stakes of the story itself? What are the stakes of your characters? And in Einstein's life, the stakes were, all of humanity getting annihilated, right? Nuclear weapons.
Yes.
Huge stakes. So you have to arrive at the nuclear bomb. You have to arrive at the atom bomb. But his life is the interesting part of how he arrived at that. So we needed 8 hours to tell his life story to get to the 2 hours of the bomb. And when Ron realized we had kind of found the right way to tell his story, he came on, everybody else came on, the studios got behind it, and we were able to tell a 10-hour story of Einstein's life. And when I think the audience responded right, the community responded right. We did get 10 Emmy nominations for that first season. Then the industry recognized it and said, let's do another season. And we chose Pablo Picasso and had the wind in our sails of the first season. So Antonio Banderas came on to play Picasso. And that was a remarkable exploration of a genius.
Yeah.
Who paid a huge price, pretty much died alone and couldn't hold on to a relationship and was a big Lothario. And you see that ego is a destructor, right? Ego is a destruction often of people. And I think Picasso was a great lesson in that. Then Aretha was really a spiritual journey of someone who grew up in the church, found flaws with humans, but came back to God. That was really her story.
Interesting.
And that was her success. And Cynthia Erivo, who's now known for Wicked, played Aretha,
right,
sang the part. Forget it.
She's great, yeah.
There are these apps where you get the dailies of everything that's shot,
yeah,
wherever you are in the world.
Okay.
And I get the dailies in the morning when they were shooting Aretha, because it was during COVID, so not everybody could be on set.
Gotcha.
So I'd get dailies often in the mornings, and I'm like, why are they putting the dailies through the sweetening sound? They're like, no, that's just Cynthia singing.
Oh, wow. Yeah, she does have just an incredible voice.
Yeah. And then again, that led to the MLKX season. And we'll see if another season occurs. The business part of the show has a lot to say in things.
Yeah.
But that's really how Einstein happened and how the Genius series happened. And it really, really is the result of our belief, but hard work every day. It took 10 years to get that series on air.
Wow.
I poured energy into that every day for 10 years.
So that was a decade of work in the making. And, it's incredible, too. It's an incredible story. There's so much to talk about from that and unpack in the small amount of time that we have with you today. Appreciate you sharing that. When we talked about it, Einstein came through South Carolina, taught at Furman,
That's
had
right.
some family. I used to live over in the North Main area in the Greenville, South Carolina community. And, he used to live right over there, or his son lived right over there.
The breadcrumbs to South Carolina for me in every way never stop.
Yeah.
Right over your shoulder is the South Carolina Football Hall of Fame plaque with the members, and Harry Carson, my favorite New York Giant growing up.
Yeah.
It's like all these little breadcrumbs lead to here. So
No, it's incredible.
I follow them.
The stories, and you grew up in and around the film and entertainment business, and successful people like Ron Howard. He grew up in business as well in Hollywood, but he took that and continued to evolve and play different roles, and you've done the same thing. I don't know how much you had spent with Ron Howard, but you attributed a good bit of sort of one of the sounded like the you'd been working for 10 years and you get this thing going, and all of a sudden someone like a Ron Howard that had at that time established himself with credibility brought that credibility to your project. Tell me, had you known Ron? How did that all take place?
One of my partners on the project had started their career at Imagine Entertainment.
Okay.
So they were the one who was able to get it into his hands. I'd met him a few times, but I'd never worked with him.
Yep.
Working with him was amazing, but like almost any business, right? Like they don't pay Patrick Mahomes all that money as a rookie. They pay him in success.
Right.
And Ron had so much success that when he came on to direct, that allowed Disney and Fox to make the big investment. They knew we had the visionary that was going to deliver the show, not just the idea.
So really, it was the getting the script right. That was the success.
That was the key. And backing up, because we're talking about success.
And how did you know the right? You talked about, hey, you got to get the right thing. Elaborate on how you define what's right. How do you make that decision?
Sure. One thing I'll say first.
Yep.
Because we're talking about, it's easy to throw out 10 years. But the truth of the matter is one of my keys to success, one of my personal keys to success, when it comes to filmed entertainment, movies or TV shows, is I've developed what I call an accomplishment mindset, which is different than a transactional mindset. A transactional mindset is you have to transact for a certain kind of money or something in a time frame.
Yes.
It's transactional. And if you're a hotel, are you selling enough rooms? And we live in a mostly transactional society.
Yep.
I won't bring up billable hours, but you know what I'm saying. And so we live in a transactional kind of society.
Careful.
Yeah, easy. But when you're trying to accomplish things like movies or TV shows, I've found that you can't think about transacting in a time frame. You have to think about things happening in their time. And you have to put energy into them until they happen. And then they become accomplishments. So year 3, people are like, you're still working on Einstein? Year 7, they're like, you're still working on Einstein? The transactional part of it doesn't make sense to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. Once it becomes the accomplishment, everyone's like, how'd you do it? Well, I kept it front and center despite it not being a transaction for a very long time. And the accomplishment was what my goal was. When it came to ultimately picking the right person,
yep.
Truthfully, there are a lot of really great filmmakers in the world, but I think you have to be authentic and understand the material that you have. And so I think Martin Scorsese is a really terrific filmmaker. I don't think he's the right person to direct Einstein's life. I think that he has a certain type of style and a certain type of character
right.
that he likes to explore. Spielberg, maybe. I mean, I can't say that person can't do anything, right?
Right.
But with Ron specifically, when you look at the body of work, A Beautiful Mind, he'd explored geniuses.
Yeah.
He figured out ways to visually show you what's going on inside a very complicated brain in A Beautiful Mind. Apollo 13. He had taken on these very tense stories of space exploration, which ultimately is a scientific endeavor in a lot of ways, and an engineering endeavor. So, Ron, his brand of filmmaking, I also think his, I don't associate Ron's work with anything tawdry, right? I mean, people have been killed and people have, there's some bad language in some movies.
Yeah.
But for the most part, he's Opie.
Yeah, right.
He's Richie Cunningham.
Guy, right. All American.
100%. And he's authentic.
Yes.
I mean, he is really, truly Richie Cunningham. He's like the most curious, wonderful, positive, sweet man.
Yeah.
So the idea of the guy that brought you A Beautiful Mind and Apollo 13 doing Einstein, the brands aligned, his style of storytelling was the best we could have ever dreamt of.
That was great.
And we got lucky that he loved Einstein and wanted to tell Einstein's story. And he had apparently found the same issues that we encountered in that he could never figure out how to tell a story in 2 hours.
Couldn't do it in 2 hours.
So when we developed and delivered him a 10-hour version, and then timing.
Yes.
Right? At that moment in time, the biggest directors in the world were doing television for the first time. So David Fincher, who's a huge director, did House of Cards. Spielberg had a couple of shows on sci-fi. Whether he directed them or just produced them, his name was there. Martin Scorsese had a show called Vinyl that he did with HBO. So the biggest directors were turning to television, which was sort of a bridge to where we are now, where they're all doing streaming.
Well, and that really brings us up to what I want to talk about for the remainder of this show. Where you are now, you're at Clemson University.
Yes, sir.
And I agree. I think that when you see it, it's economics, it's social, and then it's technological. And so you really have it lined up. And South Carolina really historically, because it's such a small state, about 5.5 million people in the whole state, technologically, there didn't really make that much sense to necessarily tell the types of stories that you're telling now here in South Carolina. But now with South Carolina, it's like a stage. It's a known place. And with the pandemic, the Zoom, everybody's on, you got 3 billion people with a TV screen in their hand.
Every minute.
So, it really does make sense in South Carolina. You've got sort of economic, social, and
here's how I
the technological setting up.
This is how I distill it, right?
But you're in Clemson.
I'm at Clemson University.
And you've got another focus. I'm going to let you tell the story because you're great at that. But I do want to set it up. You've been here for a couple of years.
Been here about 2 years.
Teaching a production class. You just created a film that is going to be released. It's exciting. And you have so much, I think, vision for South Carolina, the community in this area. So, take that. Tell us about what you're doing and why you think it's going to work.
Sure. I'll tell you first and foremost that when you say I have a vision, I do see what I think can happen here.
Yep.
But one of the first jobs that I had out of college, I started as a production assistant, really worked my way. That's like the entry level job.
Okay. And where was that?
In New York.
Okay.
And actually, my first day ever working on a professional production, I showed up and I got assigned to what was known as the key production assistant, and he asked me to go get him a coffee, and I did. And then about 20 minutes later, they asked him to go on a coffee run. And I'm like, oh, I'm getting coffee for the guy who gets coffee. Like, I'm starting right at the bottom. But thank gosh, because you really need to. There's no cutting corners.
You got to have some humility
But
about it.
When I moved up from being a production assistant to the next level, I worked on a documentary that was made by an Academy Award-winning documentary filmmaker named Barbara Koppel. That was about Mike Tyson, the boxer, at the time. And we had interview footage of a guy named Cus D'Amato, who was the boxing trainer that took Mike Tyson from kind of a troubled teenager to world champion.
Okay.
And Cus D'Amato said, I don't teach anything. I uncover and discover the talents that are there and try to make them as great as they can be. And that's what I really see in South Carolina.
Okay.
I'm not here to do anything. I'm here to pull out of South Carolina this amazing talent and vision that's here. There are storytellers here. And we live in a moment where the technology does exist, that the storytellers here can make quality stories that can be distributed in the world. And Hollywood will continue to make bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger movies. Spider-Man 10 or Avatar 5 or whatever.
Right.
They're making for a gigantic global audience in real time. On the other side of that scale are independent films that are really authentic to their time and place, that have universal emotional themes. And those are the movies that I think South Carolina can really excel in the near term. Movies that are in South Carolina, from South Carolina creators, with the values of this area, and exporting that to the world. Not just being a place that Warner Brothers can send another movie to make and leave.
Yeah.
Cultivating, nurturing the storytelling power here, and the young people that are so incredibly talented and driven and focused and smart. And they come from a value system here in the state that, no matter what they do it well, and they work hard, and they don't cut corners. And so I found this young group of people at Clemson that are so incredibly bright, driven, talented. What separates them from making movies that the world is experiencing is simple. Education and opportunity. Education and opportunity are what bridges that gap. So my mission here at Clemson is to just try to create as much education and opportunity for this group of young people that are coming through the program, so that when they come out, they're ready to tell their stories.
Yes.
And if they can tell them right here in the state and keep that going, we can export those stories, not just be a place that comes and gets utilized, really become a center that puts our values out into the world. And it's not hyperbole, right? 4 movies in the last 10 years that were under $10 million independent movies made east of the Mississippi have won the Best Picture Oscar.
Wow.
Honora won this past year. A movie called Coda. Moonlight was made down in Miami for $1.5 million.
Wow.
And Nomadland with Frances McDormand. So this isn't like I'm hoping this happens. This is happening.
Gotcha.
And as Hollywood doesn't fill the pipeline of the under $10 million independent, authentic human story, well, we can fill that pipeline. And all these gigantic distribution platforms need them. They need movies. They need Christmas movies. They need films that feel like human, and we can make them. So I take a movie, if you haven't seen it, I recommend anybody out there to watch this movie called Coda. It was made up in Massachusetts.
Okay.
I mean, you can almost smell the fish, like it's families in the fishing business,
Yeah.
right? And the Boston accents, and it is so authentic to that time and place, but it has a universal message of finding your voice. And that's why it makes a lot of money and it wins Best Picture. And I think that South Carolina is so ready to have a film industry. That does not mean a gigantic machine. It means an industry that is making quality product and exporting that product. Now, I use the word product for a reason.
Yes.
Right? Making a movie is a manufacturing endeavor, right? People think of it as an artistic endeavor.
Okay.
But it's a manufacturing endeavor. It's an assembly line. And every single movie that's ever been made is made the same way. They might have different costumes and different stories and different music and different actors. But the process of producing a movie is a repeatable process.
Okay.
It's the same way every time. How you plan it, execute it, and deliver it. And so this is one of the great manufacturing centers in the history of mankind.
Yeah.
The upstate of South Carolina, starting in textiles and now automobiles. Well, when people think of movies, I know they think of this sort of fairy dust,
It's creative
thing, and sometimes have an opinion of those people. Well, what do you think of the lead designer at BMW? You're not really mad at them for having a creative vision,
Right.
but they don't make a car. The crew on the floor makes the car.
Gotcha.
Right? And it's the same. A movie director has a vision, but it's the crew that makes the movie. It's the seamstresses that make costumes. It's the transportation folks that drive the gear around. It's the food services people that fuel the crew. It's the carpentry team that makes the sets. That's who makes a movie. The cameramen, the lighting people, the electricians. And there's no better workforce in the world than the upstate of South Carolina. So all we're doing is dialing that in a little bit to make a product that doesn't need gas or to be cleaned ever. It just makes money forever. Any movie, Casablanca is still making money.
Yeah.
So I think we can create a tremendous value center here with this amazing workforce and just produce things that South Carolina will be proud of.
Well, I tell you what, I'm so excited to have you here today, Sam, and I'm excited about this vision that you have shared with us today. Clemson, I agree, South Carolina, we are a great state and have a lot of creative folks and people that want to be in the film and telling these stories and have been for years. But I think one of the things that we have lacked is the experience of that process, the manufacturing process. And that's one of the things I'm so excited to see you is that you know how to make these decisions, which every one of these decisions will put you on that path. When you look out into the future and you say, this is where I want this to be. I want to have a successful film creation, television, or movies, whatever the distribution product might take. To have someone with your expertise and know-how, relationships, discernment, faith come in and put that to work here is exciting. So that's all the time we have today.
But I will say the last thing I'll say is back to your very original question.
Okay, yes, please.
My definition of success for this community is the success of these students coming out of Clemson, the success of the people here that want to be a part of the filmmaking process. Their success is how I define success. Certainly not me saying I did anything.
Right.
It's nurturing their talent and their ability. And if we can do that, it'll all work.
Well, we're going to track you on this. I want to get, like I said, we started this thing with me getting you to commit to coming back. And so I do want to get you to come back, and sooner than later. But again, I want to share how much we appreciate you being here in South Carolina. You've become part of South Carolina. You've really helped out with the South Carolina Football Hall of Fame, our leadership minute, the character education. You and your brother have helped shape this project for the community here in South Carolina. So thank you for making a difference, and thank y'all for sticking in here and listening to the Straight Line of Success.
Here we go. Life is a long highway and we're doing the best we can. Everybody do your best. Come on, come on.
Do your best. The best you can.